Hello, and welcome to Writer and Actor Strikes. I'll read the official description because that's what the instructions tell me to do, and then I'll read the little intro thingy. But 2023 saw a 148-day strike by the WGA, the longest since 1988, also the second longest in our history. SAG-AFTRA had their longest strike ever. Both struck over the impact of AI. Well, it's a little bit more nuanced, so I'm going to skip that official. But yes, my name is Cisco. I've been a WGAW, west of the Mississippi. That's how we do it since 2013. I've worked with and for AMPTP associated companies since 2003, 4-ish, quite a long time. But I want to let my distinguished panel introduce themselves, so please give us a name, a little bit of background, affiliation, if any, and favorite picket sign, or if you didn't go on the lines, then favorite meme or something from the strikes. We're gonna start light and then we'll get really heavy and we'll end light.
Oh boy. I'm Niles Schwartz. I've written film criticism for Slant, The Point magazine, RogerEbert.com, and other publications. I don't know, I think circling back to the whole Michael Mann thing, my favorite picket sign might be the one where it quotes thief. Profiting off the yield of my labor, that kind of thing. The picture of James Caan.
Hi, I'm Allyson. I write mostly about video games personally, but I am also a union member of not WGA or SAG-AFTRA, but passionate union member and love talking about it. And I don't know if I can remember one that I liked, but they're all just so clever, and you see why they are the ones who get paid to do what they do.
Nice. Oh, and just to throw in there, since we're missing one member, my favorite picket sign was from Niles, who was a writer for things like Dave and Effects and some other sort of pseudo-comedy content, but it was just a ginormous picket sign with ... You know what? I'm not even going to write the great joke I had for this sign. That's great. So yes, as we mentioned before, the WGA we struck for 148 days. It was May 2nd through September 27th, which is a long time. And then SAG, they struck for 118 days. And, you know, actors' talent never has to work as hard. From July 14th through November 9th. And some of the issues that were at the top, there were quite a few, but some of the biggest ones were, of course, increasing the funding and the job security, increasing the size of writers' rooms, similar to classroom teachers. If you are a teacher or know a teacher, you know that there's such a thing as not enough staffing in healthcare. Actually, if you work in any industry, if you work, you know that there's such a thing as not enough resources, limiting the use of artificial intelligence in the writing process, preventing AI from exploiting, stealing, and outright replacing talent, streaming services, residual formulas, getting better regulation over the auditions processes and conditions. Basically, we are trying to move forward as an industry. And so just to kick it off, what emotions did you feel when you first heard about the strikes, either WGA and SAG or both together, but what were some of your first reactions?
I mean, just the base gut reaction of like, good, they deserve it. I mean, I feel like every time you hear about this strike or of the last, big strike in 2008, it's always over something where you're like, oh, of course there should be protections about AI or streaming or all of that, but it's, I feel like it's always a long time coming, so.
As a person who's not a union, I'm not a writing or acting union member, but just as a consumer, my emotion was, of course, frustration and sadness because we had just come out of COVID. Mm. And the thing is that the theaters are struggling, and they were starting to get back on their feet. And suddenly, Barbenheimer is right on the horizon, I think, when this is going on. And it almost appears like maybe people are going to start going back to the movies. But when you have studios not making anything, and actors and writers for very valid reasons striking, that means that we're going to have probably later this year another drought in terms, because several months no one was making stuff. And theater owners need stuff to show you so that you go to a theater. And in the end of 2023, several films were delayed, like Dune Part 2 and Challengers we brought up. And that's stuff that would bring people in, and the theaters are already hanging on by their fingernails. This does not bode well for the future. And we will get into probably the structural, the fact that this was a bubble that was going to burst eventually because of the very infrastructure that we're in, because all the studios were following the Netflix model to trade in theatrical dollars for digital pennies, but to satisfy their shareholders and to drive stock prices up to borrow the Netflix streaming model. I think we were living in kind of a utopia of, much as I don't like the word content, in terms of how many shows get greenlit, how much there is to watch, how diverse the spectrum is of films and television shows. But too many streaming services, big debt binges, just studios going in debt to make product, but this was going to burst. So it's a tragic situation. And yeah, I'm happy, or air quotes happy, that it's resolved, but I don't know what the future holds for anyone.
That's a perfect segue. So with the strikes being kind of historic, how do they compare, in your opinions, to other historical labor movements? Like was this a turning point, or was this a harbinger of a turning point that's yet to come?
I do think that there was such an intense level of public scrutiny about this one, in a way that, I know that people were talking about other, have talked about labor movements for years, but it felt like this was such a big news story in a way that I'm hopeful that this is going to at least lead to more people being, conscious of unions or conscious of these labor issues. But then also I wonder, I saw a lot of people going, oh, why is X delayed? I don't want that to be delayed, and not really kind of connecting those dots. So it's hard to say, just because I think that there was a lot of eyes on these strikes, but also the memory of the internet and the memory of culture can be so short that you might get to a drought and people go like, oh, nobody's making any movies now. And it's like, well, it's a lot more complicated than that, but it's, they might not put those together.
Well, I think a lot of people, what's interesting about this strike in comparison to past strikes, and I'm by no means an expert on strikes, but in like 2008 and 1988, I think there was a lot more argument. And here, almost, a lot of people who in the industry who self-identified as conservative were still on the side of the actors and the writers in this instance, because they recognize that the apparatus itself is with residuals especially, is so unfair. And something has to change. And when you put in AI into the equation, it gets into this rather ominous problem for the future in terms of what does it mean to create art versus just generating content. And when, my favorite film of this year, to echo our last panel, was The Beast by Bertrand Bonello. And that talks about how we consume art and think about art, where it's just something to be passively consumed versus something that is created with an artist's idiosyncrasies, something that oversteps what we think of in terms of AI, and an actor's image, which can be duplicated and replicated in perpetuity. And who controls their image? The Rock can negotiate to have, he'll have a digital scan, or Will Smith with a Gemini Man had a full body scan and is paid $50 million, and he controls what studios do with that image. extras and people in smaller roles don't have that leverage. And I don't want my image to end up on the dark web. I don't want to be used without, and deep fakes and that kind of thing becomes another ominous issue. And I think the whole thing, why I bring up the word ominous so often, is that I think of obsolescence of human beings and of art. And it's kind of unsettling to me as a consumer, as a human being, and as someone who likes film.
We made a great point. You just mentioned about how some of the more right-leaning or traditionally politically anti-labor folks were still, there's this odd universality to the strikes last year, which is fantastic, and I want to hear your thoughts on, is that because of the era? Because in '08, there was still a very, and this is just my experience, but there's a very solid distinction between in the industry and not in the industry. Whereas now, because it's so much easier, if you write a book, you can get that to literally the world through distribution platforms like Amazon and other self-publishing platforms. If you have an idea for a film, you don't have to develop a pitch deck and get meetings. You can go out, shoot it, put it on YouTube, and get millions of views. You can be a TikToker, you can be a cosplayer. There's so many ways to become sort of part of the industry, quote unquote. Was that perhaps in some way assisted in getting that groundswell of public support? Or if not, did that impact, do you think? I mean, it didn't impact the AMPTP, those pieces of shit. It's how do you think this ends, fellas?
It's a very good question, and I don't know if I'd actually thought about that. But I mean, it makes sense, to an extent, because I do all of my writing as pretty much amateur stuff. But it is all posted on the internet, and I'm not making money off of it, but also I really do not want it to be scraped or used by AI or to be, kind of condensed into, whatever ChatGPT is gonna say about whatever review I wrote. I think part of it is because people are becoming a little bit more attuned to labor, especially, you hear all the stories about people working at Amazon or something. So I think a lot more people have heard, hey, there's a lot that's not okay in terms of labor in the US. And so people are rightfully coalescing again behind the people who are that labor. But also I think it is, there is just so much more behind the scenes stuff that's going on online too. So it's with social media becoming so much bigger, I feel like people have much more access to these kinds of behind the scenes things that they might not have had in previous years, where you follow an actor on Twitter or TikTok or something, and then suddenly they go, sorry, I can't talk about it anymore because we're striking, and then people might go, oh, let's look up about the strike and then learn more about what's going on.
Yeah, it's kind of weird when you have a movie like Oppenheimer or Barbie and the actors, the talent can't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people noticed that. And there was talk of, okay, the Academy Awards is coming up. Is anyone going to be able to show up aside from people that were in independent movies outside of the studio system?
Well, the solidarity was fantastic because in '08, again, that line, all the talk shows, and so I'll do a quick breakdown. So there's certain rules for WGA productions and SAG productions, and there are definitely some, not really loopholes, but there are exclusions, that there's certain types of programming that can continue because even though they'll use union talent, because of the nature of the production model or the nature of the agreements that are in place, they can still continue. So a lot of late night shows in '08, it was considered clever at the time, but then since there were no writers, all the producers were creating the content. Mm-hmm. Because technically speaking, if the producer was not a member of WGA, you're not scabbing by writing the sketch. You're not a writer, you're still being paid as a producer or associate producer, line producer, whatever your role is in that production. But if you're working for Jay Leno and all of a sudden his joke writers aren't there, or joke writers aren't there, he can still have something to say for his monologue because now his producer is creativeness, which technically, legally doesn't count as writing, even though the actual act of writing. Is everybody on the same page? Just making sure. I know it sounds a little circular, kind of ridiculous, but yeah. Whereas this says the same rules applied this go round, but I think, was it Drew Barrymore? There were one or two people that tried to go forward, even though again, everything they're doing is literally above board, but they were, in my opinion, rightfully kind of like rigged over the
Shut
goals.
down,
yeah.
And then others joined them, like everyone was like, nope, if you're not going, like Kimmel stopped, and all the other shows that were exempt, even though they were exempt, chose to stop in solidarity.
Yeah, I think it's pretty, yeah, some of that can get a little bit complicated, because I know that when some of those are under different union agreements, there are certain, issues that come up with that. Like, I know that, at least for my union, while we're under contract, we're not able to strike. We have a contractual thing in our contract that says, like a no strike clause that says you are not allowed to strike while under contract. So I don't know what all of the SAG for those kind of contracts looks like, but when I saw all that come up, I was like, are you, do you have anything like that in your contract, or do you have any sort of thing that tells you have to keep working? It gets complicated when there's several different contracts and there's several different unions all together. So I was not sure about that one.
I have nothing to add.
I just thought it was just really cool. Like, oh, like these guys are gonna play with us. And there were waivers for smaller productions.
Right.
Like a production I was working on, we had to stop, and then they granted us a waiver to keep going, but we still want to make sure everything is above board, because there are, as you mentioned, like different organizations, and you want to make sure you're not running afoul of any of them, or giving the appearance of running afoul.
Yeah, I think that's where I was. I thought it was interesting following all of this as. Because I was looking into this, and I'm like, well, what does my union contract say? So I started like digging through my own contract, and then I found some of the stuff like that. But it does get a little bit complicated because you have all of the all of the contracts that are in place for like talk show hosts and things like that, and then you have all the contracts in place for below the line workers and things like that. So it got complicated, but I think that the studios at least saw just how kind of poison it was for your public image to keep going with these productions. Even if it was technically above board, it's still like, it's technically above board, but nobody likes it, so.
And the studios that were very tone deaf, I think. Ted Sarandos and David Zaslav.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, what we understand that they publicly said. I don't know. To me, issues like residuals and streaming and AI that's obvious that these are things that have to be addressed. And I think with the waivers, I think it was nice how, yeah, some productions did get waivers, but like say Megalopolis, like Coppola, but everyone was very astute about still voicing their solidarity for their peers.
Absolutely. Blue.
Am I remembering correctly that the productions that got waivers actually provisionally agreed to the strike demands on their productions? Is that correct?
Some of them.
I believe so. I thought it was didn't A24 provisionally agree? Like certain studios were provisionally saying like, yeah, we agree to it. So I don't know, but I think so, yeah.
I remember reading that they were they just said yeah, we'll pay you the rates you're asking, we'll give you the agreements you're asking, and that
Which was kind of the overall strategy. So AMPTP isn't an actual union, it's not actually an organization, it's sort of a collective bargaining cabal that represents the larger studios and networks. And that's supposed to, that way when the unions do sit down to negotiate, they have someone to negotiate with, ostensibly in good faith on behalf of the interest of all the studios and all the other projects. But what happens is, you're talking about literally hundreds of companies. And so when you have A24, it's like, no, that sounds reasonable, but the group that you agreed to let do the negotiating for you is like, well, we disagree. It was really nice to see them kind of take a little gray hat approach and say like, hey, we'll get this waiver, and yeah, what you're asking for is not unreasonable at all. Like, pay you for your work,
Yeah, I think even smaller companies and studios said, yeah, this is reasonable, which I did see quite a bit in terms of the dialogue surrounding it going, well, if this small indie production can afford to pay actors, why can't Warner Brothers, why can't Disney?
I want to talk a little bit about public sentiment. So there were definitely some fun moments where, good intention, there was a lot of misinformation that went out. Like infamously during Halloween, there was that sort of like rumor that kind of became like, is it news, is it not news, that like you shouldn't even let your kids dress as characters from Struck Work. Don't cosplay, don't mention things. Like if you had seen something and it's just saying, oh my god, I know I'm late to the party, but like Rogue One is the best Star Wars and that was scabbing.
I think a lot of it seemed well-intentioned, and a lot of it was based off of, there were specific rules for, say, if you were an influencer and you were intending to join SAG in the future, like, yeah, if you have 500,000 followers on TikTok and you post, oh boy, I loved this movie, it's like, yeah, that is still promotion, but if you have 100 Facebook friends and you say, I really liked this movie, it's totally different scale. So I think a lot of it was well-intentioned, but also a lot of it was like, you need to kind of understand what the point of those rules were. And it's not to say, oh, like you can't talk about a single movie.
Yeah, I think a lot of film critics were discouraged from even writing about films, which I appreciate the sentiment at the same time. No, I disagree. So.
Right, I think a lot of people confuse film criticism for film promotion when, it can be used for such, but it's not made with the same intent either.
There was definitely a little bit of, not to be judgmental, but of like a lack of understanding on the part of the general public.
Right.
Because there are a lot of rumors saying like, stop watching Netflix, don't go to the movies, don't do this. And we're like, hey, it's not just George Clooney on the picket lines. Like, there are hundreds of people who are being impacted who need those residuals. So even though we're still in the middle of a fight with management, like, no, continue to watch it because they still under contract, we will be paid eventually. But if you stop watching it, then yeah, they don't have to pay us if it's no longer streaming. At least that's the way residuals work.
You have a lot of people who live in California and, okay, maybe one day they could afford a house within 100 miles of Hollywood where they're working and have to go every day. But yeah, they have to get, okay, you land a writing job. You get paid $250,000, let's say, for a project. Yes, but let's say, but the thing is, you don't have a guarantee that, I just have to be sure to stretch out that money for the next 3 years and, and be sure I'll get another writing project down the line. And so a lot of people struggle to be in the quote-unquote middle class in Hollywood land, which is already, considerably steeper than, middle class elsewhere. And, with this whole new apparatus with the streaming system, network TV, you'd have 20 or 30 episodes per year streaming, fewer episodes, fewer writers. And this comes to in terms of creativity, because with union deals, standardizations might change. And so we're going to require this amount of writers on a project. Yes. Now, how does that work though with, say, Mike White and the White Lotus, who writes every episode himself, or say what Barry Jenkins did with the Underground Railroad, where you have a very, this is a very enclosed cluster of extremely talented, creative people making, I know the line between television and cinema is blurry, but Underground Railroad was cinema as far as I'm concerned, and so, so there are those questions that come with any new contract.
And there's a so-called auteur clause. So if you pitch a series, or like Mike White, he's already very well established. But if you're new to the industry, whatever, if you pitch a series and it gets picked up and greenlit, and you are the sole writer, but the thing with that, why it's not discouraged, but yeah, it is discouraged. Under the agreement, you have to stay that way, which it is a lot of work to be the sole writer. I know it feels like that romantic thing of being Charles Bukowski and being like really misogynist and drunk all the time and like the typewriter creative, but it's actually a lot of work in like art, or at least the creative arts, especially television and movies. It is a collaborative medium. and having a writer's room or having a group, because when you sign that, it's not actually called the enter clause, it's more like the nickname for it. You're now beholden to that. But even Charlie Brooker, when he left BBC and came over to Netflix to continue Black Mirror, he sort of got out of that. Because one, they don't have the WGA in the UK, which is why we still had British programs, which is also something the public didn't quite get. That was really cute. But when he came over, he was like, no, I don't want to be Rod Serling. Like, Rod Serling is Rod Serling. If you don't know who that is, he wrote pretty much every episode except 2 of The Twilight Zone, the greatest television show of all time. And so that's kind of how that fits in there.
Yeah, and then you have, and you have something. Taylor Sheridan, I think, was very unsympathetic to the writers, and if ever there was a guy, well, you know, all due respect, but who probably needs some more writers. You know, he's done some good stuff, but I mean, I tried to sit through some of his other stuff, and you know, he's spread too thin, spread way too thin. You know, I'm not going to say F that guy, but you know, F that guy.
I actually have a few notes here that say if not a member, because I didn't know the makeup of the dais. And so that's 2 folks, not WGA, not SAG.
No.
Nice, okay. Okay, so question number 1. Fuck, Mary, kill, I'm kidding. If not a member, did the strike influence your perception of the economic realities in any way? Like, did you learn stuff, or did it kind of confirm things you already suspected? Like, as far as not just residuals and like contracts, but like just how sort of the machine of the industry works?
I try to follow the film and TV industry pretty closely. It's just something I've been really interested in for years and years. So, but it did kind of showing. I think a lot of people were encouraged by the discussion to be very transparent about, like, here's what my residual check looks like, and just seeing how, you know, oh, here's a residual check for a popular episode of a popular TV show, and it's like 8 cents, you know? It's a lot of stuff that I suspected, but you start realizing, oh, there are people who are working on these what feel like monumental, huge projects that are also, you know, struggling to pay their bills, and it's a lot of stuff I was thinking about, but I think a lot of it did get confirmed by people talking so specifically and so upfront about their economic realities.
It kind of reinforced where I was dreading things were going, or feeling that they were going, in terms of the bubble bursting, you know, in the sense that, okay, even if these demands are met, there's probably going to be a smaller pie for everything to go around. So people will get paid more, there will be better writing rooms, but there will be fewer shows, so fewer jobs. And that's why I talked about, you know, we were in kind of a utopia of sorts, at least in terms of product. And, you know, like, it's like at the end of Casino, where, you know, in the end we fucked it all up. You know, so that's, you know, it's the harbinger of things to come. And I mean, I think in terms, at Con, we talk about, I mean, there's so many shows that we haven't heard about now, I think, in a way that, or movies that we haven't heard about, that, you know, everything, it's so much more diverse than it was 10 years ago because of how much more product there is. And so we've gotten away from at least ostensibly away from a monoculture in a lot of ways. And I'm not sure where we're going in the future. I mean, talking about transparency, something I guess that the writers and actors weren't demanding, and the studios, of course, didn't want, was radical transparency in terms of how is everything doing, in terms of success. Because I think the dirty secret about streaming is that a lot of people, yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people watch, you know, The White Lotus, or, you know, Interview with the Vampire, or whatever, but more people are watching Friends and Seinfeld for the 10th time, or 20th time. And you know, how do we, and Netflix doesn't, when they release a film theatrically, they do not release those box office numbers. There is no transparency at all, so yeah, we're not sure how much people would be making. And yeah, it's sort of a discomforting issue.
And all of the streaming services, but like Netflix especially, are just so opaque about what they're doing in terms of numbers, in terms of how successful something is. Whereas in previous years, you'd be able to look, for network TV, you'd be able to look at Nielsen numbers and say, okay, this is the number of people who are estimated to be watching this show on a weekly basis. Whereas you really just don't have that. I mean, sometimes they'll say, Netflix will say, oh, X show has been watched so many minutes, but there's no really way to know how accurate that is.
Which is kind of ridiculous because we can say no. Like, it would be extremely unlikely for a company like a Netflix, like a Hulu, like an Apple Plus, any of the streaming services that are basically technology, to not know what their analytics are.
Sure.
Oh, absolutely.
The problem that happens though is that because it's tech, then technically or legally it falls under like IP or proprietary information. So the only way to really get that changed feasibly would be through Congress and not through the union negotiations. It would be somehow compelling breaking IP, because Netflix is like, well, we've developed the Netflix streaming technology. This is our baby. This is our IP. We cannot share business critical information publicly.
That's because in essence, a lot of these streaming services are not media companies, they're tech companies.
Right.
And that's what they're, working as, is they're not operating under a media, what was considered the standard for media companies even, 15 years ago.
So if we can get Congress.
Oh, I'm sure that'll happen.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. Like, if we can figure out, because with like when cable television joined broadcast air television, there was like hubbub around that. But because originally they focused on like if you're still using the same receiver, not transmitters, because cable television worked a little bit differently than terrestrial broadcast. That way, you're trying to argue that they didn't need to share or be a part of Nielsen's and that kind of stuff. But they're saying, well, the reception device, your TV box, was the same. Then how the signal got there didn't matter because it's still displaying something, so we need those metrics, and that's why the FCC can still impose fines and that kind of thing on broadcast and cable. With streaming, no one's pushing for that just quite yet. Also, it didn't help. There's this fellow named Ronnie Reagan. He used to act in shitty movies, and then for some reason we made him president for almost a decade. Like, he did a really good job of fucking a lot of things up in terms of oversight and regulations across the board, not just the bigger things he saw, but even entertainment. Like the fairness doctrine, if you don't know what that is, as it relates to broadcast and news and political reporting, Google it, but when you're having like a really good day. If you're having a bad day and you Google the fairness doctrine, it's going to, that's really dark. You might need Sandman, and we don't want that. We want you all here. So Google it when you're having a good day, because going from good to bad is great. Going from bad to like endless despair, less so. So we mentioned this a few times, but I really want to do a little bit of a deeper dive on it because probably one of the most popular topics, at least as far as the coverage of the strikes, was regarding the use of artificial intelligence and image generator tools, text generator tools, and how that was going to be replacing or how they would be using that to exploit talent and all these things. So I'll start with a fun question, then we'll get dark, then we'll get fun again. Is there, or what does an ethical application of AI tools, whether it's for actor replacement or writer, we'll say writer augmentation, will be generous, what would that look like, in your opinion?
I think for writers, this is the dirty, the harsh and sort of dark truth, I think, is that I think a lot of people would like what AI wrote for them. People want something that is so satisfying without any idiosyncrasies. And that's a very cynical take. I'm against it. I mean, in general, I just get rid of it. And it's inevitable. There's nothing we could do, I know, but no matter what it is and who commenced it, I'm against it, as Groucho Marx said. So when it comes to actors, though, and again, I spoke about having control over your image. And how that image is going to be, okay, because you're used once, but the studio gets to keep on using you. And I don't know, are they going to pay me for every use? What's going on there? I just think it's, the post-human future.
So would that be an acceptable model? If they had agreements that if we scan your likeness and create a perfect AI duplicate that we're going to use. Every time we do use it, not only do you get right of refusal, but you'll also get paid residuals on the back end for usage. Would that be for you, firstly?
If it's totally consensual, sure, okay. You know, and there are some estates of actors, I think, who have sold, yeah, sure. You know, and this gets to like ethical problems of, well, what do you mean we're going to bring Peter Cushing back without his consent? He's been, you know, and we're making him act again. And I mean, there are other issues like with, you know, de-aging technology. You know, yeah, you could use AI to make, say, de-aging a lot more ostensibly effective, but you're taking away the actor's choices. And even if you don't notice it, an actor is, you know, authoring a performance. And that means, you know, they know that they have the little things on their face and the little twitches. You could take that away by just, oh, I'm gonna have the computer, which is grim to me. But the audience wants that, again. So
It's all Justine Damon's fault. She put out that really well-written tweet series, except that in the middle of it, it was like she was threatening us with a really good time. Because she was like, imagine that you can just like, your favorite show's been canceled, but you can get a perfect reproduction of the show that will go on forever. Like, hey, that sounds amazing. Shut the fuck up, please.
And that's not the reality of anywhere near the reality of what AI is doing. So it's like, I think you're providing false expectations where you're like, no, that'd be great if I could have like all my favorite show continue forever, but it's like, that's not how it works. I tend to lean towards, I don't know how much, I've thought about this a lot, where I don't know how many ethical uses there are now, just especially since so much of especially the large models are built off of scope of work. So I think that if a studio or somebody built something completely from the ground up that they accessed ethically, it'd be better, but I don't know what that necessarily looks like yet. You know, if, for example, if you have a completely brand new, from the ground up model that uses all one artist's work and they use that to make something out of that. I just don't know what that necessarily looks like. Another one that I saw that I was discussing with people on my podcast about for video games was a small kind of indie studio using AI voices as part of a kind of prototyping. And part of me was like, well, if it's just for the prototype and it's for the kind of beta version and it's not for the finished product, is that going to necessarily be as bad? But then they're also selling the game under early access where you can use those voices or where you can hear those voices. And then that's where I kind of was wondering, okay, is it even okay in a situation where there is no intent for it to be used in the final product, just as kind of part of a prototyping phase? And I don't know if I really know. I just know that I'm personally avoiding kind of any media that uses AI at this point.
I like reactive AI as a concept. I'm okay with that. It's like a summarizer where it's only using content that it's fed in that moment. So if I say, here's this pitch that I want to submit, look at what I've just typed into your WYSIWYG and then condense this, or check it for errors like a spell check. Like
right.
This reactive AI I'm okay with, even when it's on weird things where I didn't ask for it, like so on Facebook Meta, you know, they now have summaries for content or comments on certain posts. They will give you little blurbs like, a lot of people think this, a lot of people think that. Well, because it can't say anything unless people have done it, but in that moment. Or Google, when you type, you know, anything without search, safe search, it just presumes that you want to see all the porn. But yeah, with anything that's creating, it does feel like there isn't really an ethical way to use it.
Yeah, I feel like I've tried to think of like so many different, you know, hypotheticals for like, well, how could it be used in this way or this way where it would be ethical? But so much, considering so much of the existing models are built off of work that was not obtained with the consent of the creator. That's where that gets tricky for me, and I don't really think that there's any way to ethically use that.
We're getting close to Q&A. If there's any comments and things like that. And I know I promised I wouldn't play devil's advocate, but I'm not going to advocate for the devil. He's worn the same outfit for like thousands of years. It's like, Jesus, we get it, you like red. Enough. Like, diversify. But just for fun. Just good. And it's a nice exercise, because that way if there was anybody on the fence, but you all look like really decent people, so you're probably all on the right side of this fence. But we're going to look at what's on the other side of that fence.
Who represents the man out there?
Oh my God, there was an exercise once that I was at where they brought in a third-party company to do some diversity training, which, this is a mild tangent, but it's got a hilarious ending, and they asked everyone, like, hey, let's start off by asking, like, everyone has, like, inappropriate thoughts. We're like, okay, yeah, sure. It's like, everyone, like, sometimes makes mistakes. So, yeah, it's like, so cool, so show of hands, who here is a bigot? And like, and you're like, because one, if you are, you're probably smart enough to not raise your hand. Yeah, it was very much in that vein. But to play a little devil's A, just to kind of highlight like how ridiculous the opposition arguments were and everything management was saying was ridiculous. We'll start with simple questions, right? So why should a writer or an actor be paid residuals, right? They've done the work. You go to an art, some of these are real arguments I had to deal with on the socials. But you go to an art museum, you don't have to keep paying the painter every time someone looks at it. So why should someone be beholden to something that was created months, years, decades ago?
Well, I'm assuming that if you agreed to be a part of a film or a television show, you signed a contract and, look, I'm working for money, and I want money, which to me that's, Picasso is dead, and I'm sure his estate has, been in communique with said museum.
Yeah, it's I think tricky to get into, but it is so much of the industry, especially the pay standard, has been built on residuals being a potential thing. So I mean, it might be different if everybody got paid, wildly ahead of time, but you don't necessarily know, something might become a huge success on Netflix however many years in the future, or it might, get to syndication or something. So it's hard to say. You can't say like, well, I think that this show is going to redefine comedy, so I should be paid $1 million for my small appearance, when it's like, you don't know that, so.
Isn't there a thing with residuals where it's, if you go beyond 2 seasons, then it becomes a more palpable thing, and that's why we have so many shows that are very expensive shows that are, we'll green light you for season 2, but say Mindhunter or Tokyo Vice recently, that there's not going to be a 3rd season for anything aside from something that is very much into the cultural conversation. That's probably another product. I think a lot of shows and movies, when they go straight to streaming, are treated like a fart in a whirlwind, and no one will hear about that. Like the movie Hitman, which should have been released theatrically, but I don't know how many people have seen that. Good Lord, this would have made Glenn Powell a star, and no one's going to hear about it in a year, and that's an issue. And that's why I think I'm a big supporter of physical media, and that's why I think that prestige labels like the Criterion Collection, they put The Irishman or Roma or Underground Railroad or Small Axe out, and they save it from the ocean, the deluge of anonymity and content that will just be forgotten and have no views and say nothing about making money.
And then also we've seen so many of the increase of things being written off for tax write-offs. So you have really excellent things being taken off of Max mostly, but like just completely being
obliterated,
erased from history. Even though I really like the originally Cartoon Network, now was on Max show Infinity Train. It was an excellent show. It was beautifully made and beautifully written, and it got just removed from everything, and it's just frustrating because it's purely for a financial benefit, not for any benefit for anyone but the studio or the distributor.
There's something dark in that one word, erased.
Yes.
You know, and which is so reflective of the digital time, you know, because we talk about lost films. Film is real, it's tangible, it's tactile, and to be erased, you're wiped out. I mean, is David Zaslav going to hold a copy of, isn't there that Coyote versus
Yeah,
Acme
I was thinking about
thing,
that
which is
one.
apparently a very, you know, what people
I've
that...
heard good things about it,
Yeah,
yeah.
but we won't know. And this is, you know, so it's kind of like the Magnificent Ambersons, but Looney Tunes. But Mag Ambersons might be out there somewhere.
So, another fun argument opposed is, shouldn't SAG and WGA have been focusing more on equalizing? Because there's a huge pay discrepancy within the industry across many, many intersectional lines, whether it's gender expression, sexual expression, racial identity. Shouldn't they have focused more on that? Which would have overall brought budgets down, which would have made the studios more comfortable. And if not, why not? This isn't equality a good thing, which I know is a trap. Don't. But yeah, like if you have like George Clooney on the picket line, and then you also have some poor guy who just got his first like small WGA project that was SAG approved, like 20,000 and under for the budget. Like those are two very, very different paychecks that they're fighting for. So shouldn't SAG have focused more on like not paying women less out the gate, as opposed to going after all these millionaires and making sure they can keep their 18 properties?
I guess I mean, I don't understand why you can't focus on both. I mean, it's... Yeah, no, I mean, I think that there absolutely are a million issues in that industry, but it's still, you know, you still need to make sure that the baseline is relatively secured, even if people are by far and large exceeding that baseline, you know, deservedly or not, but...
Well, like, so for those who are unaware, like, so there are what's called minimums. So if you are working on a legit production or project and you're SAG-AFTRA, like you, by law, by agreement, you will have to make a baseline number. I don't know all the figures off the top of my head. It used to be something like if you're lead supporting, it's like $2,000 a week or something, which is a lot lower than like Will Smith's $50 million for his weird body scan. I don't kink shame, but something like, so it's like, then people will use that saying, well, you have this baseline figure. So as long as you're making that, anything over that, you should just be happy you get. Which is kind of like saying, well, we have a federal minimum wage. Why would anyone need to make more than that? Stop being so fucking greedy. Just eat your ramen every night. It's tasty. Sorry, that wasn't really a question. That was Cool. So we're down to our last 10. I do want to open it to the audience for questions, comments, rebuttals. Actually, I dare you to rebut. But red card.
So I have like a lot of questions about residuals because I don't know a lot about how it works. But like I don't understand why like it's like the third season that like they start cutting. Like what is it about like the third season that like they're like, well, never mind, we don't want to, like, what are the additional things they're like they would have to offer where they're like, I don't want to bother anymore? What's the change?
I always thought it was about renegotiating contracts where contracts would be in place for however many seasons, and then you get to season 3 and you go, well, this show is a huge success, so says you, so why aren't we getting more money for it? And then they go, I don't want to do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my understanding is the same, especially because back in the pre-streaming days, like season 3 was like the indicator that you were doing well, or well enough that you'd probably go on for at least another 3. It wasn't the whole Netflix like one and done, or Disney Plus like we'll give you 2-ish, maybe we'll tell the story. Like the Stranger Things is an anomaly, but for the most part, because yeah, back in the old days, I mean, freaking Friends had 9 seasons, stuff like that, and they didn't have a single moment that was funny or well acted. they just had pretty people in like the most monochromatic New York City for all time. Yes, but I think that goes mostly they're just trying to keep the door open for negotiations.
Okay.
And then also there's something called syndication. I mean, you're wearing a mask, but you look like super young. Like, do you know what a cassette tape is?
Oh yeah, I mean like I barely.
Well, like syndication used to be after a show hit, I think the rule of thumb was 101 episodes.
Yeah.
You could then, so a show's on a network has sole rights to air that back in the old days. So if you had an NBC show, only NBC could show it until it hit 101 episodes. Then to make more money and in theory more residuals, they could open it to syndication, which meant other stations could buy those back issues or episodes to air them. So it's why you could be in the Chicago market and watch, MASH, even though MASH had ended. You have no idea what MASH is.
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. But you could watch shows that were already shows, or there were shows that were pioneered to just be syndication. So a lot of the Star Trek, after the original series, but like DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, and then like the Saturday morning slate of like Xena Warrior Princess, those didn't really belong to a network. They were sold to different networks so they could air them as they saw fit in syndication. That model's pretty much dead.
I mean, you still see it with some things like, I know that sort of game shows, Jeopardy is still is just syndication, but.
Any other questions? Oh, right down front.
So when you say like shows can kind of just get erased if they're not like, I don't know, like put out somewhere, like, do they have to like kind of, like there's some shows that I've heard that I like that aren't being sold anywhere currently? Can they like just, do they have to like wait until there's a movie brought out and then they can buy the rights, or like, how does that kind of work?
The rights. So rights are a whole other bag, and that gets like really, really fun. Short answer is yes. They have to have the rights, and then once you have the rights, depending on the terms under which your rights ownership falls under, you can pretty much do whatever you want with it at that point. You can shelve it, you can actually delete it if you have those rights, but it depends on the agreement. But what often happens is that there are multiple rights holders for any one project. So sometimes when you watch, say, The Wonder Years, the original like 80s series, which had a ton of music in its original airing, it took forever to get to streaming because the rights holders for all those different songs had to agree to let their songs be re-aired. But then you look at Star Trek, the movies were owned by Viacom, and then the series were owned by Viacom, and then the movies were owned by Paramount, even though it's the same franchise, because Roddenberry was psychotic and he liked money, so he can't fault him too much. But in order, before you get to Paramount Plus, they had to acquire all the rights, which included the rights to not just hold the property and like to decide what to do with it, but also the rights to broadcast the content. And it's deliberately made that way. I'm not a Joe Rogan guy because I have a third grade education. There's so much, it's so convoluted, and it doesn't make, those kind of things don't make a ton of sense. All it is, like the fact that like a movie studio, so Niles wrote the greatest script, which every movie critic has somewhere, and he wanted to sell it. He could sell the rights to a studio that would say, we want to make your movie, and so we're going to give you, say, $150,000 to option your film. They now own that script, but they can now decide we don't actually want to make the movie, even though the reason they bought the script was to make the movie, or they can then sell the rights to make the movie. So if he sold the script to Sony, he can then they can sell the rights for distribution to Disney. And then Disney can decide, well, Sony's made a film I don't like, we're not gonna put it out, which is pretty on par for Sony if you saw Venom Web. So there's a lot going on with rights management. And so when it comes to erasure of films, there are a lot of films that do get destroyed, and other films do get lost to time, because to Niles' point, if they're not preserved correctly, they just found something too, didn't they? Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff like that. I mean, one of the kind of classic examples is old Doctor Who, where they decided that having the tape to record on was more valuable than keeping an episode of a TV show. But yeah, some of the right stuff gets pretty in the weeds, and not even, they might just decide it's not worth it chasing down all of those rights. I really enjoyed a show in the mid-2000s called Ed, which is about a lawyer. It was really good, but been on no like physical media or streaming because it had a lot of music that they couldn't get the rights for.
Yeah, they just got Moonlighting back on Hulu, thank God.
It's all on YouTube.
You're right,
Well.
yeah.
But yeah, like good quality.
And that's a whole other conversation about, like, I'm all for getting your content how you can, stick it to the man, but it's also sort of like, if you watch stuff illegally, then the folks who worked on it, sometimes we're not supposed to, can't get their due. So,
That's actually what I wanted to ask about is like in this context of rights, residuals, and media access and media preservation, how do each of you feel about like pirating? Because like I pirate a lot of media, and like not all of it by any means. I still go see movies, I buy video games, I buy a lot of stuff. I'm just not super interested in like signing up for a bunch of streaming services. And I know a lot of people who like can't afford to go see new movies, who can't afford to buy box sets of Blu-rays or whatever. And it's like, should those people just not get to watch those shows? And so I'm not advocating one way or the other, because it is like contentious and like complicated. But when there are companies like Disney and HBO that are just straight up saying like, oh, you know this thing that like hundreds of people spend years of their lives developing and making? Yeah, we're gonna like throw that in a vault somewhere and nobody will ever see it because we'll make more money that way. Like, and like, well, that show's still somewhere out there on, pirates websites or whatever. So like, just like which, again, I'm not trying to ask which side you come down on, but just like, do people think about that? Are people talking about that? Or is it more that it's like, no, it's just pirating, it's illegal, it's stuff? Like, is that more the general kind of outlook?
You just come over to my place and then you watch the stuff that I provide. Steven Soderbergh, the great filmmaker, said that the thing about pirating is that trickle-down economics only is real as applies to the film industry. And that's why he's against pirating. I'm all for pirating something that you cannot see in our country, like if it's a film that can't be seen here or if it's out of print. For a long time we could only watch Chimes at Midnight on YouTube or pirated or something until finally the rights were solved.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat where I think that if it's readily, easily available, you should attempt to at least support the artist. But I mean, for example, in a lot of, especially from the perspective of video games, a lot of them are just completely out of print. You can't buy them new, you can only buy them in the retro market, which in the retro market then it sometimes is, you're paying hundreds of dollars for that game, and it's like, nobody who created that's getting that money. It's just going to collectors. So I personally don't have any issue with any sort of piracy there. But trying to do the best you can, especially for current creators, and especially if it's going to influence like a smaller creator too.
It's also a problem, I think, with, and this is a thing about too many streaming services, is that we have works of art that are subject to subscription, which I never liked, why I like movie theaters, because I can't watch this movie or this show unless I subscribe to this service, which would be like, well, if I can pirate it, I don't have to pay $9.99.
Well,
I get that, and at the same time, I don't want to do that. So
and also so many of these,
essentially, I'm paying for cable TV
right
now.
Oh, and so many of these streaming services aren't releasing anything, any of their movies physically.
Yeah, I mean, Apple, Coda is a Best Picture winner that is not on disc. I think they have On the Rocks available, and I know because I own that, but there are no plans for Flower Moon at this juncture. Hopefully Criterion gets it, but...
I always look at it as a question of who's getting screwed. So like, I have no problem with if someone wants to password share Disney Plus and these big streamers, because the people who are as dependent, they've already been paid, and like the residuals are not being affected in that manner. If it's something on YouTube where we're talking about an indie film or a big budget film that just came out, well, it's like, yeah, the studio doesn't give a shit. Like Marvel films can take the hit, like Fox is Marvel now, geez, everyone's Marvel. But like the bigger studios can take the hit, but The theater house can't, and like their share of that ticket price is so small, so much goes back, and like especially because folks bring their own snacks. I'm guilty. I like dark chocolate raisinets. Theaters carry milk chocolate raisinets. That's fucking insane. Chocolate tastes way better, but they get more of their money from those jacked up popcorn and candy prices because what they actually get for the viewing is so small. So when you pirate it, you're already taking. You're probably not getting popcorn. You're already taking that tiny sliver. That feels, for me. That's when like, I don't really want to pirate. Like, oh, you want to see Maxine? It was just released Friday. It's like, yeah, I'll go to AMC or Marcus or whatever. I'll go see that, or wait for it to come on streaming, and then we can steal it. But like, you know, like no one would get mad if you punched Joe Biden now. But if you went back to like 1934 when he was in high school, or people would be like, dude, like, why'd you hit that kid? Like, that's not cool. We're at time, so really quick. Please reintroduce yourself and then tell folks where they can find you either at Con or online.
Well, I'm Allyson. You can find me. I do mostly games criticism, though I'd like to get more into film as well. I'm a writer on Nintendo World Report and a podcast called Gaming Fix. I think in the next panel, in half an hour, I'm going to be talking about the past year in anime, so that'll be fun.
Niles, Schwartz, I think I have a Substack somewhere where there's a lot of old film criticism. I have a book out there on Amazon, and I'm on Twitter, but I don't really have anything pithy or sage to offer the cultural conversation at the moment. So follow me if you just want another following person.
Cool. I'm James Cisco. I've got 10, no, that can't be right. Like 6 more panels. I got a meet and greet at 3 o'clock downstairs, and then I'm doing the Doctor Who photo shoot. So I'm always down to talk movies or business or just about anything. About why I can also, let's talk about dark chocolate versus milk chocolate. Why is milk chocolate still a thing? Why it affected the chocolate.
I beg to differ.
Thank you for hanging out with us this afternoon. You're amazing.